Thank you. Want to thank the Vineyard Team for allowing me the time to be with you today. Just to review, this is my ag leadership education coming in. I want to review my qualifications. I am a vineyard consultant in the Central Coast. However, I've done North Coast work and San Joaquin Valley. The name of my company is Vina. It was a derivative of California AgQuest. Some of you might remember that one. I've been a consultant for 25 years. Prior to that, the Viticulturist in Monterey County. Also, very proud, I'm a lecturer at Cal Poly since 2006, and I see many of my past students here, and hopefully it'll bring back some memories. Just want to say I'm very proud to see a lot of you in the industry. My attempts to hopefully be an educator and we'll continue with this presentation. So, last 50 or so years, we all of us that have been in the business for a while have seen the need and the demands for our ecological ecological goals increase. And some of us may say, well, some of those have been a little overboard, but some of us can probably say, oh, they were very well needed. I spent a lot of time with some of the older vineyard managers, and having been grow up on a farm, I am a farm boy, spent a lot of time putting on things like parathion and dimethoate and lanate and all those other materials that are pretty much written out of the programs for nowadays, and I can say that, honestly say that is an improvement in worker safety and the environment. And we are in a sustainable conference, so I want to keep that in mind. So my hope, my ultimate goal for my presentation today is to get maybe some internal thoughts going, internal discussions among the management companies, the vineyard owners themselves, to kind of put what we've talked about in the past 3 days or so, or this is the 3 days, into an actual practical, useful tool for you to be able to use not only internally, but also show to regulators to also use for the planning of a development. So what I was hoping to do was go over the considerations for a pre-plant situation. A lot of what I do is pre-plant investigations in virgin ground, or ground that has been, per se, never been planted before, just been range land or something like that. And as in the last, 5-10 years, we have kind of, pushed out. We are pushing out in these areas that are maybe marginally set up for cultivated permanent crops. So I want to make sure that we understand the time frame that I'm issuing this presentation, and it's hopefully in that very front end of a vineyard development, so you have time to actually make these changes to better yourself on the back end. Also, it's again a new development, and you're going to need some time. I can't tell you, more times than not, I get a phone call, need a pre-plan investigation. Great, what are we looking at? Well, we got I said, time frame, what's escrow? 90 days, cool, okay. But that was 60 days ago. You got 30 days to get it done. Great, okay, we'll get it done. That's not quite enough time for me to be able to really say what's going on in terms of not only the making a vineyard work as well as it can, but also meet the environmental concerns and the ecological demands that we're all asked to meet. So hopefully you'll understand this is going to take a little while. What I have set up here is something that's going to take 1, 2, 3 years. More times probably the better. So if you have that luxury, that's great. Mitigating factors when developing a vineyard, yeah, those are easier to solve in the front end than it is to either deal with them as the vineyard goes for 20, 25, 30 years, hopefully, or have a complete meltdown 5, 10 years down the line, because we don't know what the future is going to hold of us, either through, it's tough enough farming, but you got your regulations, you got all these other things. I mean, who knew that we were going to have the labor demand problems 20 years ago. We thought we were fine. Well, 20 years is here and we've got a problem. Mitigating factors when developing a vineyard, reduce the impact of vineyard pests in the future. So hopefully some preemptive strikes, I'd like to call them, on the front end to hopefully lessen them on the back end. And if you've been here, I mean, Pierce disease is a big thing. Man, Santa Rita Hills has problems. We have North Coast. You know, we could potentially have glassy-winged sharpshooter any time now. So to do that, it may be wise to kind of plan on the front end. The purpose of instituting these ecological considerations at the time of planting. That's what we're trying to do. That's the whole outlook of this like secondary vineyard pre-plant study. And then also, you know, purchase or not, you could come upon a place that is just riddled with problems to the point that it's just not worth purchasing. And as somebody who's, you know, I make my living off of studies, so I enjoy doing these. They're fun. I make my living off of them, but there's sometimes I get done with one and go, do you really want to do this? I mean, you've got, you know, soil amending, you got these topography issues, you have these, frankly, you got some native plants that shouldn't be messed with, and you got all these other considerations, and when you end up with it, do you really have a vineyard that's going to be worthwhile? Well, maybe you should, in all terms, maybe move on, but we'll see. So a field assessment. What is a typical one? Well, we're all pretty much used to, and there's a wider range of what a field assessment would be. Now, this first example, this is, you know, I don't know how many are familiar with this area, but this is a little area outside of my hometown, Carruthers in Easton, and you can see there's a few things here that could be considered considerations. I mean, but pretty much you got, you know, the soil is ranging from maybe a sandy sand to a loamy sand, and if you're really lucky, you get a sandy loam. So, you know, considerations for water, not much of a problem. Drill a well, 200 feet, you'll hit water, no problem. Okay, pretty flat, so erosion is going to be pretty nominal. Water holding capacity is going to be kind of low, understood. But, you know, these are all nice sections, you know, we've got county roads every mile. Here is a waterway. It's not a blue line stream, but it's a irrigation canal. So, you know, you'll think about a weed abatement and so on and so forth. One area that has been undeveloped and pretty much homogeneous, you might say, situation. So this is maybe one end of the spectrum. So, you know, there's maybe a slight amount of consideration for what we're going to talk today on this one, as opposed to something like this. Now, this is something that we may be familiar with in the Central Coast and North Coast and everywhere else. We have, you know, you have hills. Can't plant on hills. You know, I've heard 20%, 30% is the maximum for terracing. There's also, you know, county ordinances and state ordinances in some places. You have, you know, so it looks like a nursery. You have a freeway going on here. You have basically some citrus. Did we all attend yesterday's Pierce disease? So you got citrus here. You have, looks like some possible trails, and maybe some of those trails are actually four-legged ones along with the two-legged ones. And, you know, you have some very diverse considerations for a planting. It's not going to be, you're not going to be able to plant from one end post to another. You're going to have to leave some ground out. You're going to have to make some sort of adjustments in your plants, which may, in some ways, affect the bottom line when it comes to purchasing it. Because I don't know too many people that will say, oh, you know, you can pay maybe $10,000 an acre here, and then we'll just throw this in. I don't know of any, you know, no many people have had that luxury. So this is kind of the same look that you may be used to. You have all these soil changes, you have all of these little nuances, and look at here, there's a blue line stream going right there, folks, and there's the San Ynez River. So those are considerations that someone, let's say, back in Crothers doesn't have to worry about. The only thing I had to worry about was a canal, irrigation canal. But this is actually likely protected. Maybe there's, some sort of red-legged frog, and there's some vernal pools here, which are protected. So the environmental concerns is much higher on a situation like this than the previous one. So you have to know that going into it. Budget for it, understand it. A normal evaluation. This is one of those that we're all very familiar with, and we're looking at soil type. We want to make sure that we have the right types of soil, that we look for the proper amount of water holding capacity, that is it fertile? Depth, soil depth. Do we need to rip? If so, how deep? That's a very expensive pre-plant operation, deep tillage. In the old days, we used to go down, no problem. We'd use a slip plow, boom, no problem. Well, we found that that's, in many cases, isn't the right situation. So we do hopefully get down to 4 feet, do it 2 or 3 different directions and move on. Soil chemistry, take some soil samples, maybe we do some multiple backhoe pits, GPS them, make some sort of assessment of the soil chemistry, pH, salinity, soluble calcium, amount of active lime, maybe assess the amount of soil nutrients in that area, look at the SAR, so on and so forth. And that will help us then to work on amending the soil at a later date or prior to planting. Presence of consolidation. This will affect the rooting depth, also your efforts to break it up in your deep tillage paths. Do I need to get below that consolidation? Impediments. It's too shallow. We are hitting bedrock, which is important to know because that'll impact the intervals and the amount of water that you use in the future, and probably your rootstocks and choices. Standing water. There could be a chance for you have standing water, and that's not very good for some of the soil-borne pathogens like Fusarium and Phytophthora and things like that. And of course, you have these guys here, soil pests, nematodes. So these are all considerable assessments on a normal evaluation of a vineyard. And hopefully we're going to assess that, and we'll understand the soil modifications that go into it, the deep tillage, soil amending, how much and where. This can be very expensive. We may need to have soil sulfur applied in an area that has high lime. We may need to do some modifications of the amount of soluble calcium in the soil to help move water through the soil. And if you should happen to have high salinity, maybe do some reclamation along with it. Rootstocks, of course, that's another thing. And a period of less than probably 30 seconds most vineyard managers spend on selections of rootstocks. This usually goes, as I understand, a call to one of the nurseries. What do you have? Oh, you have that much? Okay, I'll save that for me, and I'll find a place for it, and that's where it goes. In a realistic, it'd be great to be able to map this out, buy the amount you need, boom, done, everything's perfect. But in a real-world situation, scenario, not likely in a lot of cases. Need to fumigate. So if you do pull something out, do we need to fumigate, and with what? There's not a lot of choices anymore. So maybe it may have some decision-making on your rootstocks, irrigation, fertility in the future, but these are all things that we usually do. Irrigation needs. Do we have enough water to supply the area? Do we have enough time to be able to supply some frost protection? And the topography. Extended review of the vineyard sites. So we want an assessment of the native plants, native areas, native topography, native animals, I could just say. Assessment of the vertebrate pressures at that time, so look for your squirrel mounds, your gopher mounds, all those other things. Look at trails, and these are very obvious. You can tell if there's been, if there's deer trails going on. And these are remote places. You're not going to probably find these in Crothers, but you are going to find them in Santa Rita Hills and areas of the west side of Paso and North Coast. You're going to hopefully do some type of logging of the type, the intensity, GPS these areas, and take pictures. These are all good things for your backup plan for your SIP certification in the future, and also for any sort of regulatory agency they might ask for them. Plantable areas, basically assessing how much can we actually do. And then we're going to be hopefully doing this during the due diligence period of more than 30 days. You have some type of time to get this all done, assess it, and put in some type of report form. We can do, again, prior to the normal field study. And then ultimately, we're trying to understand the ecology and manage toward a sustainable management plan. Boy, does that sound original, sustainable. Fits in well with where we're here. So we're going to hopefully interpret that additional field data with a base map. Let's put this on a map, okay? Email it. We can put a lot of information on a map if it's pretty much done, pretty well done. So we have a tentative planning outline with block outline. Again, tentative. Doesn't mean it's final. It's just a rough outline. And we're working toward, hopefully, a contiguous planning. What you don't want to have in many cases is two different places, because that means that you're going to have to double up on the infrastructure. So try to make it to where it flows in all together, because that'll help in the future when you're moving equipment and so on and so forth. And hopefully cut down on your fencing. Tracking, if you have the ability to track temperatures in low areas, this will help with your frost protection and where to plant plants. And also the type of rootstocks, when they can come out, and the timing of which they influence the timing. And then plan for owl boxes, bait stations, and weed control. I have areas that I'm going to need to hit with Roundup early on to get rid of this, so it won't be a problem in the near future. Good idea. Also, let's hit those squirrels. Let's get them done to where I'm not fighting with them in a year or so, and those pesky topos. Let's get the gophers out. And that'll affect my, it's going to affect my ability to make a nice stand. So vertebrates, things that we're worried about. Deer, squirrels, gophers, pigs. How many people have problems with pigs? Yes, they are an increasing problem. Predatory species, where are they at? Let's make sure that we keep them happy. And if you look, there's a nice little one right there. Allows for control of gophers and squirrels in the future. So we need to assess this. Let's get it on a map, okay? This is a typical scenario I see. We have cows, but then look here. We got likely deers, and if you look over here, probably intermixed in there is pigs. And these pigs aren't just one or two. They're sometimes 40, 50 in a herd, and they're not messing around. Typically, this is a typical deer fence. It's not only there to keep out the four-legged, but also the two-legged animals. You can see they generally about 10 feet, with sometimes they go up a little higher. And then you might go to this circumstance, modify it to where you have these, basically these punji sticks. So these are, when Vietnam, they had these as, basically you'd step on them, but hopefully this will deter pigs from it. So there's a difference. You can have just deer problems, but if you have a problem with pigs, you might want to modify your reservoirs, so on and so forth. Insects, your biggest thing would be the sticky traps. Place them on the exterior to see if you have the blue-green sharpshooter, green-headed sharpshooter, red-green sharpshooter. If you're in areas where glassy-wing sharpshooter, this would be your first time for it. We're hopefully going to look at the host plants in the area, maybe put the sticky plants up there to where you can actually determine where they're at. Other considerations, again, tree removal. If you're going to look at opening up a spot, make sure that the plants are maybe need to be removed, or trim them. Trim an oak tree instead of taking it out. And then you have your temperature using the high-low gauge. Identifying these sensitive environmental areas, noxious weeds, field bindweed, all these sorts of things that would be easier to control prior to any development, and then the economic value of the property. Is it worth doing? So survey. If we look at a survey, just a base map here, some of the things I want to point out. You've got a water, you have, looks like a roadway, and some deers. So if we look at this, we do an assessment. You say, okay, that's the plantable area, so it's about half the place that's going to be plantable. If you look at it, we do our assessment, we look at the deer trails, we look at some noxious areas. Oh, look, we have a vernal pool sitting there. So we're going to have to identify this, GPS it, and account for it. And then we have our places where we'll have our traps. So the wildlife corridor, you might want to think about this. A pathway for migratory animals. They're going to need water, bedding, and food sources. Why not, instead of keeping them out, let them go through? And this can be planned along with the non-planted areas or roadways, if you're in an area that you can do that. Very common in highway construction. If you look down 46 East, you'll see them all over the place. So they're hopefully not going to be a problem. So we're going to try to modify. So we're going to remove the perennial grasses or noxious weeds prior to our planting. We're going to decide whether or not we need deer fencing and what type. If we have pigs, we might want to modify that a bit. A wildlife corridor, is that necessary? Again, it's going to increase your upfront costs. Trapping. Are we gathering the bad guys? If so, we're going to have to look at maybe taking out some plants and identifying them. Blue line streams. Are they environmental sensitive areas? If so, we'll have to maybe call somebody up and get some direction on that that's out of my league. And then plant or not plant. Ultimately, is it worth planting? Actions, fallow land. That might be an option. Deer paths, roadways, and waterways are all things that we need to plan for in a pre-plant. We just don't want to put a road right there. Maybe use the contour of the land to put them in a right place. And again, the last point here, contact regulatory agencies if they are present. So this would be kind of the last part of this presentation is here we have a vineyard that I've set up some areas for. So we have our corridor that's between two blocks. Here we have basically the owl boxes that we've decided we're going to have. So this corridor helps with the migration of the four-legged animals to get to this water source. So we're not making them go around or go through or anything. We're making it really easy. Here's our vernal pool. We basically have the back allowance for the ground. And then here, I want to show you this too. We can actually plant here if we do some sort of trimming of trees. But please note that this is likely not a place up here to plant vineyards. Too dense of oak trees. We just might want to just keep that fallow or natural. So final points. By doing this, hopefully you reduce the pressures in the future. We're going to hopefully reduce the environmental impact at that time and in the future. Abide by regulatory policies that we're all obligated to do, and it's the right thing to do. More sustainable answers to continued control measures. This is why we're here today. This is why we're taking time out. Some of the other things, it may increase developmental costs, and those are going to have to be considered when you finally buy that piece of ground or not buy it. It will, in some cases, create higher production costs. Fencing will need to be repaired, weed abatement, all this sort of things, but hopefully they will start to back off in some years. And then reduce, in some cases, the amount of plantable acres.